Ever feel like, just completely torn between who you were and who you kind of have to be?
Yeah.
Like expectations are just crushing the old you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. This idea of uh, changing who you are.
Okay.
It's Henry IV.
All right.
And we're going to use what we learned from the Rest is History podcast to figure out how this guy navigated this path to power and then what it was like to actually rule in the 15th century.
It's interesting, right? Because it's a story that repeats even today. This tension between what you want and what leadership demands.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So let's go back,
Okay.
way back, to the late 1300s.
Okay.
We find young King Richard II.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the throne, but his cousin, Henry of Lancaster, is the real star.
He's the guy capturing hearts and minds. And I think it's important for us to kind of remember just how important chivalry was. It wasn't just about dressing up. It was a way of life for these nobles.
Yeah.
And Henry, he was the ideal. He just excelled in every aspect.
Yeah, he was a total rock star.
He was.
Like tournaments across Europe, crusades, even made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I mean, can you imagine the stories?
Yeah.
This guy lived and breathed adventure.
And that's important because it built his reputation
Oh, yeah.
all around Europe as a warrior and a leader,
Right.
which is totally different from Richard II,
Yeah.
who wasn't really into martial pursuits.
It sounds like the makings of some royal rivalry.
Oh, absolutely.
So did he feel threatened by Henry?
Henry's popularity, absolutely.
Yeah.
As Henry got more and more popular, Richard got more and more worried. He saw Henry's charisma, his military achievements,
Yeah.
as a challenge to his authority.
Oh, yeah. So what did he do? Did he try and, rein Henry in?
Yeah, he tried a few things, some desperate moves to sideline Henry.
Okay.
He tried to change who was going to inherit the throne,
Oh, wow.
and then eventually he just exiled him.
Was that like a common?
Yeah, it was a good way to get rid of a rival, but it often backfired.
Okay.
And in this case, being sent away was exactly what Henry needed.
So how did he go from being kicked out to being king?
Public opinion. He used it brilliantly. He made Richard look like a tyrant,
Okay.
someone who just ignored the rules of inheritance and put the kingdom at risk, and that made Henry look legitimate.
So he was a manipulator, like a master of public image.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing. He used all kinds of tactics, like Merlin prophecies.
Oh, wow.
And he used this great story about a greyhound that switched sides.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, he knew how to use imagery and stories to control what people thought.
That's incredible. A king who was elected, not inherited, but was being a good training for actually ruling.
Think of it like this. Imagine you get a company that's about to go bankrupt. That was Henry's situation. England was in trouble.
Right.
Money problems. People still loyal to Richard. And people constantly plotting against Henry.
So he traded in, shining armor for a crown of thorns. It's like going from one battlefield to another, except this one was political.
Exactly. And the guys who do the podcast, they compare it to a new prime minister taking over a government that's a complete mess.
Oh, yeah.
You have to fix the country while fighting off threats from every direction.
Right. So how did Henry deal with all this? Did he have to do some pretty drastic stuff?
He acted quickly, decisively, especially with the Epiphany Rising, an early attempt to get rid of him. He was brutal in his response, just to make sure everyone knew he was in charge.
So being in charge forced him to make some tough choices. Choices that maybe didn't line up with his ideas about chivalry.
For sure. This episode shows a side of Henry that people don't always see. He could be forgiving later on, but early on he couldn't look weak.
Right. So we see this guy dealing with power, trying to balance who he used to be with what he had to do now. But then there's this other interesting thing. His relationship with Harry Hotspur Percy.
Hotspur. That name, it just screams warrior, a man of action. He was famous for his military skills, even got the nickname Hotspur from his Scottish enemies.
Before we get into Hotspur, what about Shakespeare? A lot of people think of Hotspur and Prince Hal as rivals, but historically, is that right?
Shakespeare got creative.
Yeah.
Hotspur was way older than Hal, closer to Henry IV's age, actually.
So, not rivals then. More like Hotspur was a reflection of Henry's younger self. The knight he used to be before the crown changed him.
That's a really good point. Hotspur's that carefree warrior. He embodies what Henry can't be anymore because of the crown.
Yeah, like the king is looking at a younger version of himself.
Yeah.
Maybe even feeling a little regret.
And it gets even more interesting when you realize that Hotspur's family, the Percys, were super important allies for Henry.
Okay.
They were the most powerful family in northern England, controlled huge areas, had massive armies.
So their loyalty was key to Henry's power.
Exactly. Henry showered them with honors and titles, made Hotspur's dad the Earl of Northumberland Constable of England. That was a big deal.
What did that job even mean?
Basically, he kept order in the kingdom, led the royal armies, and was a key advisor to the king. Power and trust.
So Henry really needed the Percys on his side. Did Hotspur have any specific jobs?
He was in charge of the northern border, protecting it from the Scots, and keeping things under control in the Welsh Marches, a tough area known for resisting English rule.
So, a lot of faith in Hotspur and his family, but like we know, that wasn't going to last forever.
Nope. They seemed like solid allies at first, but there were cracks, the beginnings of rebellion, even as Henry tried to solidify his power. Back again with more on Henry IV. And as we dig in, things get even more complicated. Alliances, betrayals, rebellions, all of it testing Henry's ability to rule.
Yeah, we left off with Henry dealing with Owen Glendower and his rebellion in Wales. This wasn't just some small-time thing, right?
Nope, Glendower tapped into centuries of resentment, the English conquest, the laws, economic disparities. It was a powder keg.
So the Welsh had a lot to be angry about. What were these laws?
The penal laws, that's what they called them. They were brutal. They restricted everything for the Welsh people. Movement, land ownership, even carrying weapons. All designed to keep them down and prevent any uprisings.
So a recipe for tension. Glendower used that anger perfectly. What made him such a good leader?
Charisma. And a lineage that went all the way back to Welsh royalty. He declared himself the true Prince of Wales, a direct challenge to the English, and people loved it.
Wow, a symbol of Welsh pride. How did the English react?
At first, they didn't take him seriously, thought they could just crush the rebellion easily, but they were wrong.
Okay.
Glendower was clever, a master of guerrilla warfare. He used the Welsh landscape to his advantage.
The podcast talked about Conway Castle. They said that was a turning point. Why?
Think about it. Conway Castle was a symbol of English power, built by Edward I to control Wales. And then a small group of rebels captured it, on Good Friday no less. It shocked everyone.
Wow, talk about symbolism. Must have been a huge boost for the Welsh.
Absolutely. It showed them Glendower could win, that they could break free. But for the English, it was a huge embarrassment. They wanted revenge.
So, did they change tactics?
They tried to crush the rebellion even harder, passed stricter laws, but it backfired. It just pushed more people towards Glendower.
It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Exactly. It only made Welsh nationalism stronger.
And as if things weren't bad enough, the Scots jumped in. Never miss a chance, do they?
Always got to stir the pot. They saw an opportunity, and they took it. Led by the Earl of Douglas, raiding and pillaging all over the border.
This was Hotspur's time to shine then. He was warden of the marches. Defending the border was his job.
Yep. Him and his father, the Earl of Northumberland, they gathered their forces and met the Scots at the Battle of Humbleton Hill.
Must have been a huge moment for Hotspur to show what he could do.
He delivered. English longbowmen, you know those guys were deadly. They destroyed the Scots. A major victory for Hotspur, and a much-needed win for Henry.
You'd think Henry would be thrilled. His right-hand man just crushed a Scottish invasion.
You'd think so, but this is where things get messy. The victory had unintended consequences. It planted the seeds for real trouble. Trouble between Henry and Hotspur.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Right.
So what happened?
Money, the root of all evil. They captured a bunch of high-ranking Scots, which meant a lot of ransom money. Henry, he needed cash to fight Glendower in Wales, so he demanded a cut.
He needed every penny he could get. But how did the Percys take it?
I weren't happy. They felt like they earned that money. They were the ones who risked their lives. This money fight opened up a whole can of worms.
Classic power struggle. Both sides thinking they're right. What else was going on?
Well, there was Edmund Mortimer, Hotspur's brother-in-law. Remember, he was captured by Glendower. Hotspur was furious that Henry wouldn't pay his ransom, even though it would have weakened Glendower.
Why wouldn't he pay? Seems like a good idea.
Politics. Edmund Mortimer had a claim to the throne. A weak one, but still a claim. Keeping him prisoner neutralized a potential rival.
So it wasn't about money, it was about power.
Exactly. A strategic move, even if it meant upsetting the Percys.
And to make things worse, Edmund Mortimer went and married Glendower's daughter.
Talk about a plot twist. A major alliance between two of Henry's biggest enemies. And it put Hotspur in a tough spot. Loyal to the king, and connected to the rebellion.
It's like something out of Shakespeare. What did Henry do? He hadn't realized this was bad.
He tried to smooth things over, offered more land, more titles, more promises, even planned a big invasion of Scotland, hoping to win them back with glory and territory.
Sounds like a last-ditch effort. Did it work?
Nope. The damage was done. The trust was gone. And while Henry was focused on Scotland, Hotspur was making his own plans. Plans that would shock everyone and change England forever.
Hotspur declares Richard II is alive
Wow.
and rallies support against Henry, calling him a usurper. I mean, that's a bold move.
It was a major turning point for Henry. He's got Glendower in Wales, a resurgent Scotland, and now a civil war in his own kingdom.
So how does Henry, a guy who really worked at his image, how does he deal with this betrayal?
He used the skills that got him the throne in the first place. Political savvy, knowing how to judge people and situations, and being decisive. He wasn't going to back down.
And this is where his son, Prince Hal, really enters the picture. He's not that playful young man from Shakespeare anymore.
Right. The Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403, that was Hal's proving ground. He showed everyone he had the skills and the guts that would later make him Henry V.
So, a big moment for Hal and the whole kingdom. What happened?
Brutal fight, huge losses on both sides. And in a twist of fate, Hotspur is killed.
Henry's old friend,
Yeah.
the guy who represented his past, now dead because he challenged his present. Did it affect the rebellion?
It was a turning point. The rebels lost their leader. The movement lost momentum.
But was it over? What about Glendower and the Scots?
Hotspur's rebellion was crushed, but the war wasn't over. Glendower kept fighting in Wales, and the Scots were still a threat. Henry spent the rest of his reign dealing with this stuff, always watching his back.
So how should we remember Henry IV? Ambitious usurper or a tough ruler who handled a crazy time?
It's complicated. He's full of contradictions, ruthless at times. Think about the Epiphany Rising. But also merciful and smart. Hard to put him in a box.
It's easy to judge people from the past by our standards today, but we got to remember the context.
Right. Power back then, it was often about force. Alliances were key to survival. Judging him by today's rules wouldn't be fair.
He did set up the Lancastrian dynasty. They ruled England for a long time. His son, Henry V, he became a legend. His wins in the 100 Years' War really put England on the map.
It's quite a legacy. Henry V makes us think about power, the line between ambition and duty, and what makes a legitimate ruler.
As we finish up this deep dive into Henry V, I keep thinking, would we see him differently if he hadn't taken the throne? Would he be a hero? Or would ambition have taken him down a darker path? Something to think about as you explore more history.
And always remember, history isn't simple. It's messy, full of contradictions and people who don't fit into neat categories. That's the beauty of it. We get to explore it and figure things out for ourselves.